From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers. Today's news talk, The Pulse.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And as always, here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. And our mission is to provide more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate and entertain, all with dignity and respect. And it's vital that we don't just ask the questions, but question those answers. That's what they always say to us in the chat. So it's got to be good. Well, AI, artificial intelligence, is everywhere, and I'm on a mission back to the Futurist to put the AI into Britain. And I'm not the only one around the world. We've just had an AI summit in Paris. So today we're going to unpack that and have a look at a regular feature about what is AI, what's going on in that space, and what are people saying in different countries. And to help me do that, I'm delighted we have a stellar panel yet again. Aaron R. Day is a multifaceted entrepreneur, investor, advisor, author, and political activist. And he's got a rich background spanning nearly 3 decades across various sectors such as e-commerce, healthcare, blockchain, cryptocurrency, AI, and clean technology. As a current fellow at the Brownstone Institute and the chairman CEO of the Daylight Freedom Foundation, he combines his industry expertise with a deep commitment to advancing freedom and individual liberty, and quite right too. And Thea Montgomerie Anderson, who I've had the pleasure of doing a number of podcasts with, is the co-founder and editor-at-large at AI Spy Media magazine. She's a unique individual, she says in her CV, hailing from a traditional city legal, political and media background, and then she retrained as part of her healing journey as a creative, completing 7 years in further education. She mastered the dark art of social media, personal branding and music, whilst being baptized with the waters of the transformational technology that is AI. I love it. I bet you wrote this as well. And Thea's is passionate about AI's potential to empower and uplift the neurodivergent community. And we've spoken about that at length, and quite right too. Well, the AI Action Summit is in Paris yesterday and indeed on Monday, the 10th and 11th of February. It was a significant international gathering aimed at discussing the future of AI. And what we're going to do is let's start by unpacking that. Let's start with you, Aaron. What were your key points, key takeaways from the summit?
Well, I mean, I think this is like, I would have called it the inaction summit if it were up to me. I think this is another one of those gatherings where people sit around and talk and nothing substantial will come out of it. There's no decision-making authority or anything out of this particular summit. There was nothing that was particularly agreed to. It stirred up a lot of controversy, but very little action. So I think it was misnamed.
Well, it is interesting. Well, what it did, it brought together nearly 100 countries. You think of how much time and money that costs, including the heads of state, tech industry leaders, policymakers, academics, and civil society representatives. They had the French President Emmanuel Macron, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President JD Vance, which I always think sounds like a cheap department store, doesn't it, JD Vance? And also CEOs from tech giants like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and others. What was your take on it, Thea? Was it a complete waste of time?
I think if you look at it from a global perspective, it's been great because it shows who the big players are. Now, there was this kind of document they wanted them to sign saying AI would be more ethical and would be sustainable for the planet. Well, clearly Britain and America aren't signing that. Why? Because America is the leader, I would say, of AI at the moment. If you look at the LLMs, they have been written by American people. So it does give them a very American point of view on things, which is fine for us as Brits. 33% of data centers are in America, and they are fired up by oil and gas. Now, traditionally, if you look at Silicon Valley, there was this kind of unspoken rule that go off, do your stuff, make money, and then go and be a philanthropist afterwards. And I find it interesting that back in January, I think it was the Microsoft guy, his name escapes me, we all know who I'm talking about. He's put about, I think it's like, he's put an obscene amount of money into data centers and trying to make them more ethical and sustainable. But it's very clear from where I would say the European point of view is that they're using the climate, in my opinion, to try and reel back America's progress in the AI space. Now, if you look at what's going on with China and DeepSeek, they have managed to utilize what the other AI LLMs have done, and they have very quickly improved upon it. They've made that that information free for everyone to read and to learn from, which in itself is, another thing. I mean, you've got to look at America's, 37 trillion in debt, and every 100 days it adds another $1 trillion. But then you have Elon Musk with Donald Trump with a mandate to cleanse and to stop inappropriate spending within government departments. And already, if you look at what has been going on, even the chat that was today by Elon Musk and Trump, inappropriate spending, they've seen that there are these do not pay blocks. Apparently it takes a year to get on the list of people not to be paid, and still people are being paid that shouldn't be paid. There are contracts that were for 3 months and 20 years later still being paid. And you wouldn't run a normal business like this, so you shouldn't run America like that, because the president of America is the leader of the free world, and obviously the courts are stepping in. But I think it's very clear from this that it has set, politics wise, we see what's going on in the world. We see much more kind of where AI and the growth is going. And if you also look at what China is doing as well, China, we have Starlink in America, which is obviously Elon, America, makes them very powerful. It keeps them ahead of the game. China has launched its kind of like own version, which I have the name of somewhere. I'll come back to you with that in a minute. And they're kind of like leaping and bounding onwards. So I don't think it matters what Europe does or what any of these summits do. At the moment, you've got America and you've got China playing catch up, and you've got India wants to be in the game. And Macron with his, Donald Macron with his plug baby plug. I don't know who he thinks he's speaking to, but it's clearly not Donald Trump. I think you think he's
Donald Trump. That's a clear reference. Plug baby Trump. Basically, a reference to drill baby drill is what he's saying on that sort of basis. But you make an interesting point, Aaron. You say it didn't really achieve very much, because we had the summit over here, the safety summit, the first in the world at Bletchley Park, the brilliant place where they had the Enigma code was cracked. And basically, what they're emphasizing, look, AI is everywhere. They talked about advancing economic, social, environmental progress. Was there anything new which was discussed?
Well, I didn't hear a lot. I didn't hear a lot that was new in this particular from this particular summit at all. I mean, these were all the standard arguments, and it all came down to the debate between security versus innovation. That's one aspect of it. But then you had the UN there, trying to figure out how we can use this AI to power the surveillance state and power UN Agenda 2030. So they were there kind of playing their role, but they were the standard suspects that you would expect to be there. But I would argue that this represents the status quo, but probably not even where the innovation is going to come from. I think innovation, and I think the whole AI industry is fascinating because it's already locked into this. It's going to be an arms race about compute. The whole idea of it is whoever buys the most computational power, burns the most energy, runs these MLMs the longest, and has the first mover advantage, they're going to win. And then DeepSeek came along and completely upended this. I think we're going to see more innovation from people. The real innovation is going to come from people that were not at that summit. That is essentially what I'm saying. And I like some of the things that are going on. Like if you're familiar with a guy that by the name of Mike Adams, who is known as Health Ranger, he's going to be rolling out an LLM called Enoch, which is based on a completely different set of data, the kind of data he's been collecting, alternative health, digging into a lot of sources that are probably not being used to train these big models. And the whole point of it is it's an LLM you can have on your computer, excuse me, not connected to the internet. So I think that's where we're going to see the innovation.
Yeah. Thea?
Do you know what? It's funny you should mention that, because I am in the middle of developing an LLM on the thing called the Clave on the Secret Network, which is a Web3 network. And the Clave is a private LLM. It takes away my need to have the compute kind of like power myself. And I'm doing that to develop or to optimize neurodiverse entrepreneurs, because when I optimize myself, it costs 200 grand, but I did it through alternative healing modalities. And the whole idea is that you can put all of that information, or whatever information it is. You could be in the Asias and want to use Chinese medicine to optimize yourself. And if you can fill your own LLM with the sort of like academic papers and things that you want, you can then optimize yourself, etc. So I see where this guy Enoch going, the Enoch system, sorry. I see that as being very relevant. I mean, if you look at, I think it's a third of Americans engage with at least one well-being practice a day. The well-being market is massive. I see that AI can make leaps and bounds forwards on that. And I see that AI agents with LLMs can help people really be the best version of themselves, and make a more entrepreneurial society. So I'm really keen to see what Enoch comes up with.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, there was a study done in the University of California, San Diego, and they were basically saying that chatting to Chat GPT was more empathetic than chatting to your GP, because basically you've got more time, it understands more about you, it's using all of that sort of information. And certainly similar research just out in the last few hours saying about how teens who are feeling very, very lonely basically are turning to AI and these AI companions. Because they can feel, they can relate to them. Well, what's your take on that, Aaron?
Well, I mean, as to whether or not AI has, I guess, better bedside manner than your doctor, I guess that's not entirely surprising. In the US, the average patient only spends, I think, 7 or 8 minutes with their doctor. So you go into the doctor's office, you go through this whole process, you end up filling out the same paperwork twice, and then you see the nurse, you fill out the paperwork again, and then the doctor shows up and asks you for all the information you just filled out 3 times on the paperwork. Yeah. And so the doctor has so little time to spend and is such a rush to just bill that doesn't surprise me. And I think that you are going to see a big ramp up. I mean, look, I think some of the areas to really explore with AI that I'm interested in are, well, what is consciousness? What is human emotion? What is human react? We don't even really know the answers to these things, and I think that we're going to find some interesting solutions. And I think we're going to see more direct, person to AI interaction.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And that was one of the messages from the previous summit, if you like, is that AI is a great co-pilot, because people are always scared it's going to replace them and so on and so forth. And I talk around the world exactly on that. I always say that AI is perhaps our greatest human achievement, but also the biggest existential threat. And we need to understand what the concerns are, how we can harness it, but using it as a co-pilot makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the narrative coming out of Paris was all about that, wasn't it? It was all saying, well, hang on, we've got to think about intellectual property because it's scraping the internet for all this IP, and basically to create these wonderful systems as a result of it. And one of the big messages was about trust in AI. And I always say trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. And trust in politics, trust in the media, trust in all sorts of things is at an all-time low. And we're living in an era of fear, aren't we, Thea?
Yes, I would say that. And unfortunately, around AI, there is a lot of fear mongering. If you look at, there are some people who are on the non-fear side. And if you look at David Schreier, he actually is an American, based here in the UK, who is a professor of AI and innovation at Imperial. And he states that AI, rather than using it to cut jobs, you should enable your employees and then use it rather to build better employees that are happier about their jobs and actually making your company more money. So don't cut 100, enable 100 with AI. And he was at WEF talking about this. So yeah, interesting guy, but I do think there's a lot of fear around. That's why I went into the publishing world and have a magazine in politics and AI to spread contextual news, basically, and the truth, because fear is contagious. It's like a virus, but it doesn't have to be that way. AI is the best friend, in my opinion, of neurodiverse entrepreneurs, because for autistic people, for instance, they can put an email from a neurotypical person through a ChatGPT and say to it, what do you think they really want me to respond? Do you think they want a 3-page essay on how to answer this? Or do they just want a yes or no? And they have academic papers have been written about this in the UK. And the researcher used TikTok and autistic people's videos on TikTok to analyze them for what they were saying, and how ChatGPT had helped them deep dive them subjects for 3.5 hours, and they didn't feel they were being shamed like they would be normally by a neurotypical person wanting to talk about something for 3 hours. So fear, not fear. I think it's a very positive thing personally, but you know that.
Oh, no, I absolutely. But it is the strongest human emotion. If you want to persuade anybody to do anything, it is through fear. And we've seen that in lockdowns during the pandemic and various other things, and all these horrible headlines that you get, the adverts, even back in the 80s about AIDS and the terrible things that you used to see with that, the glacier and the iceberg is coming. You see the tip of it. It's all about fear. That's how you control the mindset. We're going to come back to this. We're going to take a couple of messages. Do not touch that dial. You're watching The Pulse today.
The Pulse.today.
Thea, here we go. Thanks, Anu. Well, hello. We didn't even get an intro then. We love a little bit of music occasionally. It's Andrew Eborn here with the Muckrakers as always, and I'm joined by Aaron Day and Thea, or Montgomerie Anderson, the extra stuff that we've been talking about. And we've been talking about AI and how it affects every single aspect of our life. And we're just touching before the break, Aaron, on fear. Talk to me about fear of AI and how we stop it so that the general populace can feel a bit more reassured.
Well, I mean, this is always what happens, and I think you mentioned before. We usually have these big changes where it's problem, reaction, solution. Create some problem. The reaction's usually fear, and then you bring in some new solution. And with technology, there's always fear of new technology. I remember I started my first company in 1995. It was an internet company, and people were afraid of the internet. You would read all of these articles about how everyone's going to lose their jobs. The internet is going to displace everyone. And in the end, the actual opposite was true. Certainly, far more jobs were created as a result of the internet. And the problem is that it's just uncertainty of the unknown. That's what people are really fearful of. But if you look at the potential that AI has, we're going to be solving problems. We're just going to be elevating as a culture, as a species, and we're going to be solving new and more innovative problems at a higher level. We just can't contemplate what those are now. And so that's what I'm seeing a lot when it comes to fear and people resisting any kind of new change. I mean, the only thing that I fear, frankly, are these summits where people come up with ethical standards that they try to use to impose on top of technology, because what that ends up being at the end of the day is censorship. I think one of the things that's interesting is using an AI that doesn't have these barriers, because it allows you to actually access truth. When I started using AIs a couple of years ago, I could get OpenAI maybe a couple of versions ago, before they really started censoring it. You could get access to completely different information that you get access to now. I can't even run some of the same searches today that I was able to run 18 months ago. And that's not because of the AI, that's because of the ethical screen that's been put on top of it. So to me, that's the only thing that I'm concerned about. But the AI itself is gonna be a shot in the arm for humanity.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about the searches and the censorship, if you like. Tell me about some of the searches you could do before that you can't do now.
Well, I've written a book called The Final Countdown, which is about CBDCs and technocracy and how we can use alternative currencies, which is what I've been doing since 2019 to avoid getting stuck with CBDCs. And so I was using AI heavily to do research on some of these groups that, like the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, some of the more shadowy groups behind the scenes that are kind of pulling some of the strings of some of the more front-facing groups like the UN and others. I'll give you one example. I wanted to run a search of, who was on the board of directors of the Club of Rome and the Council on Foreign Relations and Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission. Were there any people that were on all four boards, right? And I got some answer back. It was a woman that I was not familiar with who was affiliated with the Carnegie Institute. You cannot run that search today, or maybe you can with the most recent model, but that kind of information, that entire class of information has been stripped and has been sanitized from at least ChatGPT.
Yeah, and it is interesting. We talk about sanitization. We mentioned about DeepSeek, and I've been playing around with it, and it's phenomenal. It had a very little investment. It took the world by storm. But you talk about censorship. You type in, as I did, it would tell me about Tiananmen Square and what happened there. It turned around and said, well, I can't tell you that. What's your take on that, Tia?
Well, this is precisely my point, is that LLMs that have been written by America will give you an answer on that, but one written by, say, China or Chinese people won't, because their government run things differently. I'm sure there's probably, things that, so my point is that the LLMs that we currently have out there, now there are a couple, they aren't representing the culture or the beliefs of every nation in the world. They just do it from the people who wrote it, who have their own particular biases, as it were. And that's the way we are. So what I would say is that China, as you know, the state has quite a lot of control, good and bad. If you look at the Chinese people, they're generally quite healthy. With they're looking at setting up EEG coffee shops where you can just go and have an EEG whilst you have your cup of coffee and work out if you've got Alzheimer's. That's not something that rolls in the West. In the West, we are looking at, it comes down to individuals. Like if you look at Ramses Alkain from, sorry if I said your name wrong, Ramses, from Neurable, he's changed the little EEG detector things, so they can plug on your ears while you're listening to music and then tell you what's going on in your brain. So the way that fundamentally, say, America and China actually operate as countries and as a social system is different. In China, it would be the government backing that project and pushing it forward, and it wouldn't have, in some ways, as much red tape. If you've ever tried to put on a music concert in China, you'll find it's very difficult in comparison to America or the UK, because every single city, every police force, every fire authority in each individual province, as it were, needs to give you sign off, and it will take you a very long time. And that's why, it's quite hard to tour China as a big musician, and they don't have the massive stadiums we have. Like even their football stadiums aren't as big as like some of our smallest ones, say in America or in Britain. So when you look at it, just fundamentally, I would say that these things also make a big change to the society, the way it runs, and also the way it's going to be able to develop its tech. So there are things in China potentially that could have been developed, they have the brains for, but the government will stand in, and the people will also develop from a point of fear because they don't want to disappear. But people disappear all over the world, let's be honest. It's not just a thing that happens in China. And in America, it's more down to the capitalist individual to create something that is socially beneficial. So for instance, with Neurable, with the headphones that you can be listening to music to, they can also monitor your brain and tell you if you're likely to be getting Alzheimer's, which I think for the average person is an amazing thing, because then you can make lifestyle choices and it's flagged up on your mobile phone. You don't have to actually physically, I went off and had EEGs, I know what's going on in my brain, but not everybody is willing to jump down that rabbit hole or even knows it's available, right? So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well, the other thing that people are scared of is that somebody other than yourself has that information. And we talk about fear, and we talk about the fear of Russia, we talk about the fear of China, and we had a lot of places around the world are saying, well, hang on, we won't have TikTok because the Chinese are getting all this data about us. What's your take on that, Aaron?
I mean, my take on that is, I know from my experience, the entity that spied on me the most is the United States government using big tech. And so this is kind of the whole joke of the thing, is we sit here and try to act like we're concerned about what China is doing. But it became apparent after 2020 through some of the examinations and actually a lot of the work that the Brownstone Institute has done, and it's now been proven definitively with the Twitter files, that we actually have the US government directly intervening with big tech to censor people and to track people's information. And Edward Snowden showed us that as well. So I think a lot of these things are kind of manufactured fear, manufactured polarity. And I actually think most of it is centered around the idea of, let's get America versus China, America versus Russia, whatever it happens to be. But all the while, what ends up happening is they're building the surveillance state and moving towards a global technocracy. So to me, that this seems to be what most of the fear-based tactics are about, because every time they push out the fear, their response is always more censorship of the people. And there's no action really taken or any effect taken on the supposed offending government entity.
Yeah. Thea?
I think that's really interesting. And in the UK recently, of course, there's been an announcement that, remember in 2018, you'll remember this, Andrew, that the government pushed through all these things that basically took away our privacy, but they didn't utilize it. Now, the current government has decided they want a backdoor into Apple's encrypted service where we all save our data, which means that either Apple will have to somehow cordon off the UK, or they will have to go to war with our government. And they're taking away our rights. Now, we as British people had a lot of privacy rights, and apparently we now, technology-wise, have less than, say, the Chinese. I don't know how much truth is in that. I read it years ago as a statement in a kind of review of what was going on with that act. But I would say that if we genuinely fear China, I don't think Apple will be making its mobile phones in China, right? They make, 280 million mobile phones that go out globally. And they could be stuffing something in there, but they're probably not. I think it is that there is issues with our own governments and with us as human beings. We have become lazy. You know, when I was part of Extinction Rebellion, I did their PR media messaging for Kensington. When I was in that field, it was interesting that the minute we wanted to set up people's assemblies, that's when we became the enemy of government, as it were. And we rallied a lot of people because we were pointing out things, which is actually our own laziness and our own wish not to get involved. Now, some people don't get involved in politics because they'll get sleazed, and decent entrepreneurs in the UK have been sleazed with nonsensical stories that have gone national and even global when there's absolutely no truth in it and there are no facts, right? But we as a kind of human beings have been a bit lazy, and we've allowed bureaucracy to take over. So even in the UK, even if you vote in a different government, our civil service was given a lot of powers over budgeting and stuff like that by Gordon Brown, which he thought was doing a good thing, no doubt, that it would keep, you know, things steady. But actually now you're being run by people who have their own political agenda, who haven't been voted in by the British public, and who aren't really answerable to anybody in our civil service. And you see the same issue in America, but I think you see this globally, and that we are kind of sleepwalking a little bit into a one world government. And historically, if you look at the Bible and stuff like that, not the same one world government, but historically, when you look at the amount of times the world has reset itself, that doesn't work. And I think that's also why people are becoming a little bit more nationalistic. We're not stupid. Brexit.
Well, I think you're so right, and people need to, and you should be awake and question everything. And I always say that data is the new currency, and every time we sign up, I can guarantee that everybody watching, people around the world, nobody reads the terms and conditions. But the permission that you're given is not just China, but all of these different entities, all of these different platforms, the permissions that you're giving to use the data, the stuff that you put onto these platforms. And as I always say, if you're not paying for a product, then you are the product. That's right, isn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, the average American signs between 150 and 400 of these click wrap agreements every year. So whether it's a terms and service for X or Facebook or whatever it happens to be, or Microsoft. And I actually did a kind of an analysis of this. If somebody were to read all of the terms and conditions, they would have to spend an hour a day, 365 days a year. And of course, no one does it. There was a study done in 2004 that found that 76% of people clearly didn't read it because they signed an agreement that said they would give away their firstborn and would give all of their data away to the NSA. And so we have given away almost everything. And there was this absurd case in the US where a doctor was on a restaurant on a property owned by the Disney Corporation. He had a food allergy and died. And Disney tried to use the fact that he had signed the Disney online service agreement to watch, you know, movies and cartoons and things to get out of the liability for the death at the restaurant.
It is quite extraordinary. As a lawyer, we always say that it's fairly clear case law that you have to highlight any extreme terms so that people actually consent to it. So people should challenge that, and excluding negligence or death and injury as a result of negligence is quite a lot of law on that sort of basis. But we should challenge it. And as you say, it is rubbish. It's the biggest lie that everybody says, that I've read and understood all the terms and conditions. They never do. And that's what we need to look at, that sort of basis. The other thing that's happening, as I say, is that apart from worrying about the terms and conditions, data is the new currency. People need to question everything. Just to highlight the issue and because you are, both of you, experts in this field, put it into perspective. How much information, how much power are we giving to these platforms? Thea?
Well, the platforms, if you look at Dan Steinberg, who did a book called Unsupervised about AI and it being, you know, the frontier technology it is, he's doing a new book on data. He's so concerned. Now, this guy is like he's a VC and used to come from a tech background. Everything is about data. You know, you can start your own LLM, but it's absolutely useless unless you have a huge amount of data sets to pull from. This is what makes things like Meta so powerful, for instance, or or Google so powerful, because people have given away their data, their behavioral data. You need only to look at the way Dominic Cummings for those of you who don't know, was an advisor within the Tory party, and he utilised data in theory to manipulate or to wake up the British public, because he knew what, where, and when to hit them with what type of adverts. And so data is possibly the most important thing, because it gives you behavioural analysis of people, whether they're aware of it or not. And that's scary.
You're absolutely right.
That is control.
Oh no, it should be scary. Aaron, what should we be aware of?
Well, I mean, so just as an example, Google from a 2022 study collects nearly 40 different data points per user. So a data point might be your search history or your location data or the content of your emails, and that's just Google. And so every other service, Microsoft, Amazon is like this. And then when you read the terms and conditions, they have the ability to sell or share your data, which they do. So all of this information is being pooled and collected and analyzed and housed. And so it's incredibly worrisome. I mean, this is why now it's to the point where if you have your phone out, if I've got my phone on my desk right now and we finish this interview, I'm going to start getting ads related to the content of this interview. I mean, that just happens, right? And it's very eerie. And it happens that my wife and I share an account, and then all of a sudden stuff is showing up on each other's feed. It's a very insidious situation. I try to move away towards decentralized tech for everything. And I'm trying to, although I can't say it's easy, to just completely break free from big tech, but move to decentralized solutions, move to encrypted solutions. Even with something like AI, I use something called Venice.ai, is one of the many things that I use. And it's basically an ability for you to access multiple LLMs, but in a way where your data is not collected and it's anonymous. And so I always try to move towards those solutions, but you can't avoid all of big tech yet.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. I think in the UK at the moment, I think, therefore I am arrested. And this whole thing about thought crimes and now access to WhatsApp groups, which people used to have end-to-end encryption. There's been a number of these sort of cases. It's a worrying time, isn't it, Thea?
Yes, it is. Although the WhatsApp groups I do find quite interesting, because technically speaking, they're not GDPR compliant, unless they happen to be an announcement group, because most people's WhatsApp groups that are being run, you can see everybody else's phone number on it. And most people haven't signed away that they gave other people to see, they gave the admin of it the permission to see their phone number. I find that quite entertaining. I noticed with Telegram as well, they were trying to get access to all the stuff that was going on in Telegram. And I think the guy finally bent, blew to the wind. But yeah, the whole data thing, the privacy thing, I do find that very interesting. And I'm going to be interested to see, Microsoft are investing like 80 billion into data centers. You've got the new Stargate thing, where OpenAI, SoftBank and Oracle are all kind of like, are going to be putting money into a project called Stargate. I mean, I think that's like 500 billion. I'm going to be seeing if that is just going to be another data rampage, or if they're going to put some protections in place for human beings so that we have our privacy. Do you know what I mean? I do think there's a lot going on in the tech world that's good, and a lot of moral people out there. And there's also a lot of cowboys that can't help themselves and forget they're only on the planet for 5 minutes. Basically,
absolutely. Well, this is what we do on Back to the Futurist on the Muckrakers. I want to highlight both the good and the bad, so people can make their own decisions, because that's the important thing. If we arm people with knowledge, they get informed decisions. But there are certainly worrying times, and the people being arrested for these non-crime incidents and so on and so forth is really appalling. We're going to come back to that. We're going to look at more of the investment and look at some of the positive developments in AI straight after these messages. Don't touch that dial.
Critically analyzing global affairs, the Muckrakers. Today's news talk, The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and joined by Aaron Day and Thea Montgomerie Anderson. We're looking at AI and the seismic advances across all sorts of industries. And we're talking about the summit in Paris. And actually, a lot of people talked about these significant financial commitments. I think there was 109 billion for AI development in France, 150 billion in Europe for AI by a coalition of investors. What's your take, let's start with you, Aaron, on all these huge pledges to invest so much in AI?
I think it'll be interesting to check back in a year and see if any of that actually materialized. I mean, I don't even know, because I've tried to dig into what does this actually mean? What is the commitment? Even the $500 billion Stargate project in the United States. Is that actually going to happen? What happens if it doesn't? It's just an announcement of something to happen, but without a lot of specificity. And so, I mean, clearly countries and corporations are showing their commitment, but we'll see what happens. And again, I think most of it is all based around this idea of more data centers and, you know, bigger LLMs. And I suspect the real innovation is going to come not from this brute force, let's see who can burn the most energy. I think the real innovation is going to come from that which we cannot currently think about or understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thea?
I don't think 109 million is very much money. A billion is very much money, to be honest. Not when you consider the sort of like unlimited money China can put behind things. But more interestingly, I think money will be thrown at it. The reason being is we look at the American economy, right? 5% of, I think, GDP, you know, basically tech is the biggest growth in GDP within the American economy. Everything else kind of stays static. And it went from 5% to about 15%. It's been a bit of a free lunch, put it that way. And I think it will carry on because it's an area where America can succeed. And there are investment houses that are very much behind it and investing in this. You know, the investment in AI in itself is a bit foggy. Nobody really knows what's going to hit, what isn't going to hit. So people are putting money everywhere. In Britain, you have the pre-seed investment market has actually been quite good because Britain, we don't really overly invest. We're not like America or like Silicon Valley where we throw stacks of cash at things. We don't have that kind of like gung-ho attitude with money. We're much more pragmatic. You put your money into a British company, probably won't become a billionaire, but you probably won't lose it either. And you see in the pre-seed market, there are brands like AI Cat, which are a personal branding brand run by a woman, interestingly. And she managed to raise 270,000. And I think Tapio is the brand that is just invested in her again. So she's steadily raising investment in the pre-seed market and getting on clients. I know that Neurable that I talked about managed to raise about 50 million in America, as I said. So it is a different vibe over there. But when you look at like Brad Gernstein, he is very much into the AI. He and Elon Musk and Trump have got like all teamed up to do their thing in America. So I think investment monies will come hither. And I think it will be much more, I think America is going to do the best they can to invest, because if you look at it, if they cut all the wastage there is in federal government, and then that slows down inflation, the American people feel richer, and it will in itself allow other industries then to go forth and prosper. So, and tech and AI is the kind of saving grace for America at the moment. They do have 33% of data centers, and being British and being the friend of America, I'm feeling very comfortable about that, I have to be honest.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, one of the concerns that was raised, and obviously a lot of conflict here between the UK and the US and the rest of them, if you like, was about Europe's regulatory approach potentially stifling innovation. And some people are advocating a lighter regulatory touch to keep pace with global competitors. Where do you stand on regulation, Aaron?
I mean, I'm very much a libertarian, so I'm pretty anti-regulation because just my experience as a political activist and then looking at government, usually the regulation that gets put in place is regulation designed to protect the incumbent players and designed to push censorship and actually to push a particular social agenda as opposed to about actual legitimate security concerns. And so so particularly in the AI game, though, given how quickly it moves, whoever has the lightest regulation is going to win. Hands down.
And that's got to be right. And that's one of the things that Elon Musk, as you know, Errol Musk, Elon's father, is on the Andrew Eborn show all of the time. And we unpack those sort of stuff. And that's one of the things. You need some regulation to make sure certain things are protected. But over-regulation stifles innovation. So talk to me, Thea. The UK and the US didn't sign this international agreement on AI at the summit. Talk to me about the reasons why they didn't.
I believe the reasons why they didn't sign was because of the ethical, green, sustainable thing. It would basically, if America had signed that, they have 33% of the world's data centers. They would have to very quickly made those ethically green. And in theory, they're saying oil and gas isn't ethically green. The planet is heating up, by the way. No matter what you do, that would happen with or without drilling. And there are facts. What there are issues are in the planet is the quality of air in which we're living in, the plastics in society. I'm not saying that there aren't environmental issues in the world. And when you look at Antarctica and they've drilled down for thousands of years, you can see that the cycle of the planet heating up and cooling down is naturally something that happens. But had America signed that, then there would be big pressure on them to not drill, baby, drill. And data centers do take up a lot of energy. That's a fact. That is, and America wants to remain in the lead, and they want to get down their borrowing capabilities. Not capabilities. I mean, they're borrowing every 100 days $1 trillion. I mean, $1 trillion. Are you kidding me? When Ronald Reagan came in, I think debt was about 34%. Now it's about 133%. I mean, that's a big from 84, around the regions of 1984. I'm not big on American history, but I do kind of remember looking back and studying a bit of this when I was at university recently. So I think definitely there are reasons why, but I also think that had they signed it, they would then have signed something that they're not really agreeing with and that they're not going to maintain to. We in Britain are still dependent on oil and gas in the North Sea, although we have built a lot of environmentally friendly energy sources, and I know the Scottish government are really behind that in a big way. France says that it's nuclear and that it can go off and do it, but it hasn't really made the leaps and bounds in AI that America or even China are making, and I'm not convinced it's going to either. When they did their regulations in the EU, they got a lot of people around the table to talk about it and discuss it, and that's phenomenal. Whereas in America, they got a lot less people around it, and it wasn't amazing. And I kind of think they've pretty much scrapped it now. America, unlike many other nations, because the president has a reasonable amount of power, can move due to executive orders quite quickly.
He's certainly done a lot of executive orders. We had over 300 in 100 hours, an extraordinary number. You make a very interesting point, Erin. We talk about the climate and the carbon footprint. The 100 people flying into Paris. Talk to me about that hypocrisy.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the big agendas here, particularly for the UN and for the conference as a whole, is to put on the table the sustainability of AI. And so again, what is the total carbon output of all of the people flying their private jets and everything else to this event, compared to what it is that they're trying to regulate? But I do think that it's true that the US and the UK didn't sign on to this because why would they? Why would they restrict in any way, shape, or form? What's the incentive to sign it? I mean, it's what would be the purpose of signing it? But I think that it's true that the U.S. is taking this approach of, we're going to lead the way in data centers, we're going to lead the way in energy, which, by the way, even that is kind of foolish. I mean, we have something in the U.S. called the Invention Secrecy Act, which was signed in 1951 or 1952, and essentially we've suppressed 5,000 patents. So when you submit a patent to the patent office, someone can come in and basically swoop in and say, hey, we think this is a threat to national security or a threat to economic security. And there's no process for actually challenging this. And so what happens is, if you're the inventor, your patent now, you can't talk about it, you can't build your patent, and if you do, you will instantly go to federal prison for, I think, 10 or 20 years. So this is very serious, but this has been largely used now for almost 80 years to suppress largely energy innovation. And so I hope as part of, if they're going to do something as part of this DOGE, why don't we make available these patents and this innovative technology? Because I do know a lot of it. I'll give you an example. It's not really national security, it's economic security, and that the oil companies are concerned that they're going to have to fire a bunch of people and they're going to lose a bunch of money. And that is acceptable enough of a reason for them to actually shelve a real innovative, clean energy patent.
Yeah. Thea?
Oh, this is very interesting. A guy came to me actually who wanted me to do a bit in my magazine about how his granddaughter or something like that in America had in her own garage managed to make the Tesla thing of getting energy and electricity from the atmosphere and actually make electricity with just this device. And I remember saying to him at the time, number one, I wouldn't go bragging about that. She won't be around for long. And I think that maybe you need to take that to a country whereby they desperately need it, where they don't already have big players. Oil and gas are phenomenally powerful. My ex-father-in-law had a £1 billion company doing oil and gas. No, I thought we'd been taken off air then. And so.
Oh, did you think this is censorship? You think all of a sudden your ex-father-in-law has got influence?
And well, he's dead now. But anyway, but it was quite. I mean, God, he even had meetings with the Pope. That's how much power he had.
Oh, is that right? Good heavens!
Yeah, a Muslim going to hang out with the Pope in the Vatican. That tells you got power, my friend.
Wow.
But that is that part of that is a global thing. Like particularly in the Middle East, this is why people keep fighting over the Middle East. Even look at the Ukraine and Russia. There's a big gas pocket underneath there. Why do you think people are fighting over it? Right. So,
absolutely, but you're so, and it's a point to emphasize is that when you look at these places, and Trump mentioned in the last few hours, basically when he's talking about Ukraine, he said, "Well, you've got to pay for all of this, and we're going to look at what you've got in the ground. We're going to pay us with rich minerals and so on and so forth." And a lot of it, there's a geopolitical aspect to it as well, isn't there, Aaron?
I mean, there absolutely is. I mean, Greenland is clearly all about mineral rights. And if you and by the way, Canada is I'm sure also about oil and energy. So this is clearly going on. I mean, we're almost going backwards 150 years in terms of geopolitics, but that is definitely one of the prime motivators of this. And AI uses a lot of energy, and the GPUs and a lot of the other technology behind it uses a lot of rare earth minerals. And so this is truly a battle that's ensuing right now, and it's interesting to see it play out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I say Trump, I mean, he talks about making America great again. He's probably having the biggest land grab of any president in history. He talked about Greenland, he talked about Canada, he talked about Gaza, Riviera, and he's also talking about Mars. So the whole thing in history, President Trump is not just making America great again, he's making all of these additional things, making it much, much greater, isn't he, Thea?
I think he's Genghis Khan's spirit come back again. It's our Trump between Trump and Elon. Daddy Musk, tell your son, my eyes on him. They have between them, either procreating or trying to do a land grab. I think they've got some Genghis Khan energy definitely going on between them. Definitely.
It is interesting. Going back to the summit then, the statement, what it used lots of nice little fuzzy words, comfortable words, like, and it included dozens of countries, including France, China, India. They pledged open, inclusive, and ethical approach to technology's development. Why would people resist that, Aaron?
I mean, the U.S. rejected all of that at the ballot box. I mean, fundamentally rejected that. And that is the whole inclusivity in all of these things. It's part of this movement towards one world government. It's part of this kind of woke culture. So certainly JD Vance explicitly, I think, spoke out against it. And so, yeah, that's not popular anymore. That might have been popular 24 months ago. That's a non-starter today.
Yeah, no, and it is interesting in light of the criticisms, particularly by Vance, as you say, JD Vance. The Commission has added the AI Liability Directive to the list of legislative acts it plans to withdraw in its final 2025 work programme. So it's going to get rid of that AI liability side. In the last minute available to us, I said we're going to finish on a particular positive note. What has been your favourite AI development? Even today, great announcement. Thea, let's start with you.
Okay, so my favorite development obviously is the neural headset, because it's reading people's brains and helping them optimize themselves. So for like a guy called Jay Peak, who's got cerebral palsy, he used ChatGPT to get himself a mathematics degree in MSc, and has used it to become an entrepreneur. Now, this is a man in a wheelchair who you have trouble understanding his speech. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. That man would have been on benefits the rest of his life, whereas now he's able to go off and develop apps and be self-supporting. So, and I think that things like Neurable, when they will develop further and further and give more and more people opportunities to be self-actualizing entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. Aaron, what's your favorite AI development?
My favorite AI development is actually the NVIDIA $3,000 supercomputer that's going to be launching here very shortly, because this will allow anybody to be able to actually have their own, I'll call it self-custody AI on their own desk, and you'll be able to create your own language models. You'll be able to have them locally on your computer. And so I like this because it's a big push towards decentralization. We've had this, most of these things that are going on, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, all of this is tech behemoths battling it out for complete control and technocracy, but we're starting to see on the edge now decentralization fight back. And to me, that's huge because AI, I believe, overall has the potential to be very empowering for humanity.
No, absolutely. And it's been wonderful. Even in the entertainment space, AI at Disney's research used for creating animated characters and scenes like the AI assisted animation in the Lion King remake. Every single industry that we speak about has got seismic advantage. And we're going to unpack them every time on this episode of the Muckrakers. It's going to be a regular feature, Back to the Futurist. In the final few seconds, then, we'll start with you, Thea. How can people find you and tell us a bit more about and find out more about what you get up to?
I'm the editor-at-large at AI Spy Media. My website is www.aispymedia.com. I'm currently doing a raise for an agentic AI that I'm building on the Clave called OptimizeMe.ai. It's aimed at the neurodiverse market here and in the US or anywhere. Anyone actually could use this, but what it does is it takes data from things like Neurable and other wearables and your own personal, say, emotion diaries. It then puts it into a private LLM, so that you're not putting your medical data out there, and it allows the LLM to then may prompt you. So if, like me, before a new moon or a full moon, you tend not to sleep very much, that's a great time to launch a new business or to do an art.
Fantastic. Aaron, 10 seconds. Let's tell people how they can find you as well.
DaylightFreedom.org. You can learn all about my fight against CBDCs and also teaching people about decentralized cryptocurrencies and AIs.
Brilliant, fantastic. Aaron, Thea, it's been an absolute pleasure. We will get you back here on the Muckrakers, but for now, thank you for joining me. I will see the rest of you, same time, same place, tomorrow. Take care.